get going here. I know that the last time I came and I did a presentation for you, that I talked about climate change and how we've been trying to see if we can identify evidence for climate change in ancient times. And so that was the presentation that I did. And I think I mentioned that I came to do research in climate change in a roundabout way, because when I started this big cave project in Belize many years ago, the last thing I was thinking about doing is figuring out, whether climate change had affected the ancient Mayan. But many of the clues and evidence that we were recording sort of started to push us that way. Another thing that research did was it pushed me to try to understand what human skeletons were doing in caves. And one of the interesting things about that was that many of these skeletons were not of adults, but of children. And so, I started to figure out, well, why? Why children? And did we have significant amounts of evidence for ancient Maya child sacrifice? And so my research took me there too. And I like to say that good research always leads to other types of research. And that's exactly what happened with the work that I was doing. Now, that presentation that I did for you on climate change incorporated some of the material on child sacrifice. And so we were chatting a little while ago, and I thought, how many of you guys were here when I did that talk back then? So about half a dozen people in the room. So I was thinking that, I could do one of two things. About a week ago, a colleague at NAU asked me if I could talk about crystal skulls, because he had Googled my name, I don't know why the hell, and saw that I had sued Disney. Because remember, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And in that movie, they say it's the skull from Belize. It's the skull of doom. So he said, wow, I didn't know you were, into all that. And I go, oh, I need to clarify that story. So he asked me if I could do a talk about the skull of doom with the Belize crystal skull. And so we just downloaded both of those presentations. So I can either do the one on child sacrifice, and those of you who were here before, you will see some repeats of slides.
Are we going to have a real example?
Of the crystal skull or child sacrifice? I was looking around the room.
There are many.
And I think the youngest dude here is over there. And I think that's why he sat over there, close to the door. But anyway, I'm equally willing, prepared to talk of either one. I can leave it up to you guys.
Sacrifice.
A little gore, everyone likes gore. No wonder Halloween is
We started it last year, so
That's true.
All right. I think you should carry on with that.
Then that's what we'll do. And so for those of you who are here, like I said, for the climate change one, you will see a few slides that relate to that. But, like I said, all these cave side projects obviously grew out of my overall cave project. So here we go. Just a little point here about the name. Chak is the name of the Maya rain god. And so, I thought, well, what evidence do we have, like I said, of child sacrifice? And I did not want to just look at archaeology, because sometimes, the evidence that we can acquire through archaeological investigations are limited in many ways. But fortunately, in the Maya world, we also have a lot of art that the Maya themselves painted, And so it's the Maya telling us about their culture through their own medium, and that is, art, their artistic expression. I also wanted to look at what had been written down. We, again, working in the Maya region, are fortunate because when the Spanish and other Europeans came over, the Spanish priests recorded a lot of information. And today we have access to that information because it's been translated into all different languages. And then I also wanted to look at ethnographic reports, reports that were done fairly recently by some of the early explorers traveling through Central America. And they witnessed, several types of ritual activity. So it's a really rich resource to try to address some of these kinds of questions. So just wanted to, give you that kind of background. So I usually like to start with a slide like this. How many of you ever been to Belize? Again, like a half dozen folk. Well, we're somewhere around there. Belize is the southeastern part of the Yucatan Peninsula. You can actually fly direct to Belize from Dallas, from Houston, from LA now, from Atlanta. So it's not hard to get to, except that you live in Flagstaff. It's a pain in the butt. I had to do it overnight, either in Phoenix or in Dallas, because there are connections. We only fly to a couple places on Flagstaff. Anyway, there's Belize. Right there in yellow, it's the only English-speaking country in Central America, because some of you guys, who unfortunately we can't sacrifice because the rain gods would not accept you, will remember it as British Honduras. Yeah. And it was a British colony right up until 1981. So it's not too long ago that we got independence from Great Britain. And if you were wondering, that is my home country. I was born in Western Belize, about 25 years ago. Anyway, one of the things that I do, I came to NAU in 2014, and ever since I've been there, I've taken my students, both undergraduate and graduate students, to Belize. The graduate students acquire data for their MA theses, and the undergraduate students take a course in field methods in archaeology. And we hire a bunch of guys from a small Mayan village just at the base of this hill where the site of Actun Tunichil is located, one of the bigger sites in Western Belize. And so you can see, like I said, the students, workers, and yours truly right there. And here again are some of my NAU students after we had excavated this little shrine, and later on we conserved it. But I'm here to talk about cave work. And as I said the last time I was here, I also got to do cave work in a roundabout way. Ever since I was a kid growing up in Belize, especially Western Belize, there were hundreds of caves all around because it's all limestone country. And we have, unlike Arizona, there's a lot of water, right? Lots of rivers, of course, tropics, lots of rain. And as a kid, I used to go and explore some of these sites. And then when I started to do archaeology, I kept going back, but not because I had any, specific research interest. They're just awesome places to visit. And what was even more awesome is that they all contained evidence that the ancient Maya were in there, right? The Maya were using these caves. And I have never been into any cave where I have not found evidence that they were there before me. And some of our caves are huge, right? Or as my students say, ginormous. Right? You can see somebody on that rock over there, and then there are a couple other people right here. So really massive chambers. And one of the things that we know is that, like I said, no matter where I've been, there's evidence that the Maya were there. We find artifacts, and every once in a while, all right, don't get carried away now with the artwork. We sometimes also find Maya art. And as you see in this picture, there is an individual with a jaguar skin pelt. And look at that, he's got a knee pad. He's a ball player. And there's a ball, rubber ball there, and there's the profile of a building. So he's playing ball, but it's in the underworld. And the Maya used to do some really interesting things with their art.
they use what we call heuristic devices. And that is, little things to say, hey, pendejo, if you didn't figure it out, here's a little clue where this ball game is taking place. Now, just in case some of you don't know what the word pendejo is, it's a scientific term to mean wise one, right? Anyway, so if you look just above the ball, there's a bar and 4 dots. It's the number 9. Well, we know that the Maya partitioned their universe in both vertically and horizontally. Most cultures do the vertical division. I'll give you an example. If I were to ask you guys, where's heaven? You'd probably point that way. And sorry, most of you guys won't go there. And then there's earth, and then the underworld. So we all divide the universe in a tripartite vertical way. And then, that middle place is earth. Well, the Maya further subdivided their heavens and the underworld. The heavens had 13 levels. 6 going up, the 7th at the zenith, 6 going down.
Oh.
And then the underworld had, so the number 13 was sacred to the Maya, not evil like in our culture. And then the underworld had 9 levels. 4 going down, the 5th at the lowest part of the underworld, and 4 coming up. So whenever you see the number 9, it is associated with underworld concepts and themes. And so that's the heuristic device. It's like the Maya were saying, just in case you don't know where this ball game is taking place, it's taking place in the place of 9 levels in the underworld. And this painting we found in a cave. Now, the other thing we know about caves from some of the evidence that we have is that caves were considered places of fertility, of death and resurrection, or rebirth. For example, they believed that the sun rose every morning, traveled the 13 levels of heaven, and then at night, the sun was transformed into the jaguar god of the underworld, and then had to travel through the underworld, and if fed and if successful, it would resurrect back as the sun. Now, I remember when I was reading all this ethnohistoric, like I said, information provided by priests and explorers, I always wondered, why the jaguar? And then one day, I think I banged my head on a stalagmite, or sorry, stalactite hangs down, and it was like an epiphany. I realized, why the jaguar? What are the 2 colors of the jaguar? The color of the rising sun and night, right? Black spots and that. So here again, see the dude's wearing an outfit that's jaguar, and he's got the knee pads, so he's playing this game. And the Maya also believed that certain gods of fertility live in caves. So this, not just the sun resurrecting, they also believe. And I'm sort of giving you this background so that we can then, when we start going through the slides, you'll start to recognize some of the concepts. Well, we also know that the Maya, right, if anyone ever read the book called the Popol Vuh, it's called the Sacred Book of the Quiche Maya. Well, this sort of myth, there are several parts to that myth, really. There's a section about the creation of the universe. And then there's a story of 2 sets of twins called the hero twins. So I'm going to give you the quick, short version. According to the Popol Vuh, the maize god, right, the corn god, and his twin brother used to like playing the ball game. But when the ball would hit the ground on earth, it would annoy the gods of the underworld. It was too much racket. So they summoned the corn god and his twin brother into the underworld, and they put them through a series of tests. And at the end, the gods of the underworld sacrifice the maize god and his brother. They decapitate them. And they take the head of the maize god and they hang it up on this tree. And this tree was barren. But as soon as the head is hung on it, it starts to bear fruit. And the gods forbid all the people in the underworld to go look at this tree. Well, one day, one of the daughters of the gods of the underworld decides to sneak off and goes to the tree. And the skull of the maize god asks her to come closer. And she does. And the skull asks her to extend her hand out towards her. And she does, and the skull spits in her hand and she becomes pregnant. Well, she can no longer hide her pregnancy eventually, and so the gods decide she needs to be sacrificed. And they send her to be sacrificed. She convinces the two guys who are going to sacrifice her to release her and let her go up to earth so she can give birth to her child and rejoin her mother-in-law, so to speak. Right? And so they agree, and they kill a deer, and they cut out the heart of the deer, take that to the gods and say, look, we sacrifice her. She goes up. She gives birth, but not to one child, to a second set of twins. And these kids grow up, and like their father and uncle before them, they are adventurous, etc., and they find their father and uncle's ball game equipment. And so they start to play ball. And the gods get annoyed. Another, bunch of people playing this game. Go, they summon them down to the underworld, they come down, but they're far more astute than their father and their uncle. And they're beating the evil gods to all their tricks and challenges. Well, but eventually they're also forced to play a ball game and they're sacrificed. But they ask that their bones be thrown in the river, because we have lots of rivers in the tropics, right, through caves. And so what happens is that, who is their father? The maize god, right? The corn god. What happens when you put water on corn? It sprouts. It resurrects. And so they come back to life. And they start to travel through the underworlds as tricksters, as magicians, and the gods hear about them and invite them into their court. Well, one of the tricks that they would do is they would kill each other or sacrifice each other, but then bring each other back to life. And the evil gods go, can you do that to us? And they say, of course. But they do not bring the evil gods back to life. And then they go to where their father's skull is, and they resurrect their father. And they take their father up to the heavens, and they go to this 3-hearthstone place of creation. And there, the maize god creates all humans. Because the Maya are people made from corn. So caves then are places of fertility, of resurrection, of rebirth. It also is where the rain god lives, because all of our caves have rivers coming through them. So people associate caves with fertility. And the Maya, who are prudes, unlike the Romans, or if you've ever been to Pompeii, which is the little room or house most visited in Pompeii? The one that is about this big, and every wall has every sexual position you can think of, and then some. And that's where everyone goes, right? Not the Maya. The only time you see kind of sexual activity with the Maya is in some of these places that are associated with fertility. So, just wanted to put that. So anyway, whoa. So some years ago, I decided, I wanted to start a cave project. And one of the reasons is that most people who were doing cave projects were only investigating one cave. And any good archaeologist will tell you a regional perspective is so much better because you start to see patterns, right? It's like if somebody were to come to study our culture today and they only went to one village, right? They have a sense of how we live and how we behave. But if they go to 10 or 15 or 20 villages, they'll have a much better sense of American culture. So I decided I was not going to do just one cave. I wanted to do a whole bunch of caves. So I started what was called the Western Belize Regional Cave Project. And like every good archaeological project, I had a whole bunch of things I wanted to test out. And the one that I'm going to talk about today is this one here, right? As I said, I was finding a lot of skeletal materials in these caves. And I wanted to know, who are these people? Are they all female? Because one Spanish priest talked about how in the cenote of sacrifice at Chichen Itza and Yucatan, they used to throw female virgins as offerings to the rain god. And for me it was like, is that more a Western European concept of sacrificing female virgins? Or did the Maya also practice that? And one way to figure that out is to look at the skeletons. And so I wanted to figure that out. And so for my project, as I said, I wanted to work in West Central Belize because my hometown of San Ignacio is right there. At that time, my mom was still alive, and I could go there and get pampered because every time I got there, somebody knows mom's cooking. but every time I get back, either from Canada, I did my PhD in England, or from the US, my mom would always go, "Oh my God, you're skinny," and she'd force feed me, right? And you can't say no to mom's good. So I decided to work right out of my hometown, and like I said, I wanted to work with 3 different river valleys. And so here are the 3. Here's, again, my hometown's right there. And I wanted to do the Macala River Valley, the Barton Creek Valley, and the Roaring Creek valleys because I wanted to do this regional project. And those are just like the anchor sites that for each valley. But we then did research in several cave sites in all those river valleys. Well, of course, you'd have thought that I would know better coming from the tropics, that I should not have started my project in June. That's the start of the rainy season. Well, unfortunately at the time, I was teaching at the University of New Hampshire, and I had to go in summertime. So I was stuck with the bad weather. And fortunately, it was just the first year of this project that we were having. Sometimes we get stuck on the other side and we have to go back and camp the night and wait for the river to go down. But anyway, one of the sites that we worked at was Actun Tunichil Muknal, or Cave of the Stone Sepulchre. And we gave that name to the cave because there were lots of skeletons in there that almost looked like they were in a sepulchre, right? So you can see the shoes of my students in there. You have to swim into that little section. And there are a couple other places with deep water. And guess what I just found out? This other colleague of mine at NAU, we just got a grant to start the new cave project. Well, he's a biologist and he studies animals in caves, or that frequent the entrance of caves. And we want to see if those animals were used in Mayan mythology. We know already about the jaguar. Jaguars like to hang out by entrances to caves. I've seen them, spooked them, and they didn't find me tasty, so. But anyway, he just told me that he's been doing some work in Belize too, and he has seen crocs at the entrance of the caves. And I mean, this is after years of me going into some of these caves up to here, right? And say, "Oh, don't worry, there's nothing here to bother you." Anyway, so ATM. As every good archaeological project, the first thing we did, that was the entrance you just saw, we did a map of the cave. And what we found out was that up to about a mile in, it was as far as the Maya were utilizing. From there on, it was really deep water, and these guys are going in, right? The ancient Maya were going in with torches, not with flotation devices and pencil and lamps and head hard hats for helmets and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, like I said, we did the research there, and I'm not going to show you too much of the evidence. I just want to take you first to what we call the stela chamber. So here's one of my grad students talking to some of the other graduate students. And you notice there, we came across these 2 monuments about that big out of slate. Well, there's no slate inside the cave. So those had to be brought in. And that's about half a mile in. And they're pretty substantial and a little bit heavy. So we mapped the little chamber, and that's where we found those 2 monuments. And here are drawings of those. And then around it, and at the base, here's some of the artifacts that we found with them. And in fact, right by the base there, we also found 2 obsidian prismatic blades. Anyone knows what they used obsidian prismatic blades for? For bloodletting rituals. It looks like somebody's, experimenting. You can hear me? Okay, good. So, we know that the Maya would sometimes take obsidian bloodletters and also stingray spines, and they would pierce the thumb, the tongue, the penis, the ear, and collect that blood, and then on bark paper, and then burn that paper as offerings to the gods. So do not try and live it at home. So we found 2 of those underneath there. And then when we started to look at the monuments, there's some really interesting here. So one of the other artifacts we found there was this beautiful vase. I didn't have a little turntable to do a fold-out photograph. These are just different angles, and here's a drawing. And it shows this warrior presenting a captive whose hands are tied to this lord. We know that he probably was going to be sacrificed, that guy there. Well, going back to these 2 slate monuments, if you look at them carefully, right? In fact, I have another here, there. If you notice this one, it tapers to a point. It looks exactly like one of those obsidian bloodletters. So right away I thought, is it possible that it's representing a bloodletting implement? And then when I looked at the other one, this one was even more interesting. Because if you count the number of notches, guess how many it has on each side?
9.
You guys would pass my Mayan civilizations course. Flying cars. Right? So yeah, 9. Again, it's that heuristic device to say, hey, this is the underworld. But then when I looked at it carefully, it also represented a bloodletting implement. A stingray spine. So then, it made sense that we found, and this is one of the little bloodletters of obsidian that we found at the bottom, at the base of this. So right away, right, we started to see evidence of sacrifice there, at least auto-sacrifice. Maybe the Mayan would stop there, let some blood, and offer it to the gods. And I put this slide in here because I don't want you guys to think I make some of this stuff up. I don't smoke anything illegal, just in case you're wondering. But if you look at this is a little figurine of a Maya, and what is he doing? Piercing the penis. That guy, painting in a cave. You can see the blood spurting, right, from there. So again, we know, like I said, that these kinds of activities happen and one of my students decided to try with a stingray spine that we got on the coast. Obviously the student did that without my say he should, but young people, right? Anyway, so up from that chamber there, this big chamber was just amazing. Beautiful chamber. You can see the formations. We call this the cathedral. You can see some of the students walking up in there. And we call these rimstone dams. Whenever during the height of the rainy season, they fill up with water. And so we just walk on the rims so we don't step on other area. Well, listen, the entire floor of this chamber was covered in artifacts. You can see everything above ground are broken pots. And there's a skull. And there were some more human remains over there. One of the things that you notice in caves is that all the artifacts are either smashed, or part of the rim is knocked off, or sometimes they put a little kill hole. They cut a little circular hole. And the reason why they did this is that the Maya believed that things that you and I consider to be inanimate, like this table, my head, to the Maya, everything had spirit, had life. And so if you use an object in ritual as an offering, or it contained an offering, you had to release the spirit of that. And also that way it ensured that everyone had to use things that were zuhui, Maya word for pure, uncontaminated. And so hence the reason why they're all smashed. There's a little kill hole in that one. You can barely see the nick of the rim. That was a little dog whistle. The head's broken off. This one you can't see the other side that has a little piece broken, but everything. The only thing that I found in the cave that wasn't broken are these adzes, which were used as hoes to till the soil. Notice the agricultural fertility connection. Right? Even the metate, see the piece broken off the metate, right? That's like mortar and pestle. That pot over there too, you can't see the base of it, and also is knocked out. So we know that they were doing that. But we also find lots of human remains. And this one is an adult, somewhere around 30 years of age, very likely male, based on some of the features. But the majority of the skeletons we found in this cave were children. In fact, there's a little skull. See the trauma to the skull there? There's a little femur right there. It's about that big. Now, if I put that next to my femur, you can see how small that is, right? There again, look, another child, less than a year, look at the femur. Right, that's 5 centimeters. So again, that little femur of an infant. This one is a child probably around between 7 and 9. This one between 5 and 9. So a lot of subadults or juveniles, inside the cave. Even this individual here is a young teenager, somewhere between maybe 16 and 18. And it's really hard to tell, whether it's a male or a female, because we didn't want to remove it. We'd have destroyed if we tried to pull it out, because it's almost stuck to the floor of the cave. And also I didn't feel like, we should be the only ones with the privilege to see this. By the way, today, visitors can go to this cave. I trained a bunch of guides, and everything is still inside the cave. So if you ever go to Belize, Actun Tunichil Muknal, or ATM, not hard to forget. And one of the things that I noticed, when I went in after a major rainstorm, the same skeleton, only the top of the skull stayed above water. In fact, we were finding that most of the bones, most of the skeletons, were being deposited in places where there was active water flow. And, one of the things that I have suggested is that, remember again, what are humans made from? Right? The maize god, children sow their corn. So what happens when you put water in the corn? Well, they resurrect. Right? So again, really interesting. But whether or not that's the case, like I said, I'm not too sure. So anyway, when I looked at all the skeletal remains of the cave, right, there were 18 individuals. More than half were children. 9 were infants under 3 years of age. And then the other 2 that I mentioned. And then the rest of them were adults. So I remember when I was thinking about this, I suggested at a presentation that I had done that I felt that they represented, victims of sacrifice. And one of my colleagues there said, well, hang on, do you have any evidence of trauma? And I said, well, mea culpa, there are only a couple of them that show obvious signs of trauma. I showed you the one that had the little skull with the hole in it. And obviously, because the bones didn't grow back, it meant that they died from that injury, right? So I said, no. But then I noted that they were all placed without any grave goods. So they were not burials. They were part of the offerings. And then you will see later on, I'll show the slide from some information that I gathered. Among the Aztecs, when they sacrificed children to the rain god, what they would do is they would pinch the little kids or poke them with spines to make them cry. Because sympathetic magic, their tears falling would petition the rain god to make it rain. So rain is like tears. And that's, again, from some of the information that was recorded among the Aztecs. Like I said, we're going to come back to that in a little bit. So anyway, like I said, some remains show evidence of trauma, like this one here, but that one, not there. But you notice no grave goods. And then I thought, well, guess what? If you were to leave a little kid, less than a year old, or a year old, or 3 years old, inside a cave, and then you left, what would that child start to do? Start to cry. Right? And thus summon the rain god. So, we'll come back to that. I then started to look at other cave sites for examples of human remains. Look at all the human remains here. Dozens of individuals. And you notice where water flows. Another example here, right? This was during the dry season, but you can see that it's starting to get covered with some calcium carbonate or limestone that forms in caves. In the other river valley, the Martin Creek Cave, this one is deep. You either have to go in a canoe, or we do inner tubes, and you put your backpack. I usually do, my backpack is waterproof, so I keep some air in it, and you can use it as a flotation device. That cave has this chamber that's just ginormous. Look at a person there. There's a person there. It's a massive, massive cave chamber. Well, in this cave, we also found skulls. And here's the breakdown, right? There were 3 that were under 3 years of age, 9 of them were under age 12, 2 were adolescents, and then 11 were young to mid-age adults, so juveniles predominantly. We even found this little corn cob, that's 3 centimeters. So this little corn cob was like 6 centimeters, about that. And so we noticed that they're taking in the early ears of corn before the corn is fully mature. Again, notice youthfulness, right? Young, sort of underdeveloped, if you want, right? Corn. This is a little finger bone. I mean, it was astounding when we were astounded when we found it. But you notice it's like a nose. It was carved mouth, eye, and you can barely see that arm there. Little end digit of a finger that was in there. So we dated all this stuff, and of course, it came out that it was, between 750 and 900 AD, which those who were here before will recall, that's around the time that Maya civilization starts to collapse, and major drought conditions. So anyway, right, the question was, were these burials or human sacrifices? Well, one of my other colleagues, who decided, not too sure that, that you're going along the right path here, said to me, and in fact, a really close colleague who is now a professor at my alma mater where I did my PhD, she said, there's no word that you could take Maya for sacrifice. Right? And, and other people have commented that, it's hard to tell between a sacrificial victim and somebody who may have been buried. So it was like an uphill battle for me to try to address some of these issues. Well, other people have said, well, you've got to take context into consideration. In other words, where are these remains being found? In caves. What are caves to the Maya? Caves are among some of the most sacred places to the Maya, both in ancient times and today. So it's like if you were to find skeletons in your church. We don't place skeletons on the floors of our churches, right? However, do we have human remains in some of our churches? We do. In fact, if you go to Europe, almost every cathedral in Europe, on the altar, it has a relic. Because that relic makes it sacred. And sometimes those relics are a bone fragment of a saint, or a fragment of the cross, the wooden cross, where Jesus was crucified. So we have that kind of stuff. And then other people came sort of to my rescue, and they said, hang on, you know what? Vera Tiesler and her husband, Andrea Cucina, 2 of the best Maya biological anthropologists, they said, not all forms of sacrifice leave evidence of trauma. Remember, if you left a child there and walked away, the child was going to die eventually, right, from starvation. And so there would be no trauma. Or if you do heart extraction and you cut right below the sternum, you can then put your hand in, pull the heart, cut it off, and that wouldn't leave any evidence of trauma either. So there are ways to sacrifice people without leaving any evidence of trauma. And then I remember reading something from this guy who said, you know what, sacrifice, this is a semantic question. Because sacrifice means to make sacred. So you can't just assume, we think, oh, it's this awful, activity or awful tradition or practice, for killing somebody. You can look at it from another point of view, is that you're making it sacred. And then, if we look even at the Christian Bible, what does God ask Abraham to do?
Sacrifice Isaac.
That's right. That's right. And right as, Abraham was going to do it, God says, no, you've proven that, you will follow my orders. So, the other thing that, we notice is that this guy said, you can't compare an English word to a Maya word. I mean, you can maybe do it to another European language like Spanish to English, but Spanish to Maya, it just doesn't make sense, right? They don't translate. It's like if this gentleman was from Mars and he just landed on Earth, and I were to say, guess what? Frank, our buddy Frank, kicked the bucket. now that alien from outer space would probably think that Frank was going down the street, kicking the bucket. You and I know that is a metaphor, and that it means that somebody passed away. Right? So it's like, if I were to write this here, you to get Joe Grant. Now I bet none of you guys know what that means.
No.
In Belize, where I come from, we speak English patois, or English Creole. And so it's, the best way to describe it is like bastard English. The more mistakes you make, the better it sounds. So anyway, so if I were to say, to one of my friends, you to get Joe Grind, if he's from Belize, he'll understand what I mean. It means that his partner is cheating on him. So we said, right? And so where I'm going with this is that the Maya word for sacrifice would never translate to sacrifice because there's no equivalent translation between Maya and Spanish. There are some words that you can interchange, but that's about it. Anyway, so I thought, all right, let me look at Maya art. Is there evidence in Maya art that they were sacrificing children? And so I started to look at all these fold-out drawings of these beautiful vases that have been found. And if you look here, look at this individual here, lying over an altar, but he's missing something. He's missing his head. And the hieroglyph there means the finished one. That's as close as you can get to a word that almost means dead, right? So, again, in many Mesoamerican languages, right, when somebody is sacrificed, they refer to it in their language as the paying of debts to Tlaloc, the rain god. So humans owe the gods. And the gods, the Mesoamericans have the sense of reciprocity. And that is, if you feed the gods will feed you. If you treat the gods poorly, they will treat you poorly. So there's that sense of reciprocity that, to some degree, we have lost in the 21st century, in many of our modern-day cultures. So victims then were not considered people who are being sacrificed. They're offerings to the gods. They're payments. We owe the gods. If we want our corn to grow, if we want our crops to be plentiful, then we gotta feed the gods. And what are humans made from? Corn. So if you offer corn, humans, to the gods, they will offer you corn. So it's reciprocity. So anyway, I started to look at other examples, right? Another cave, if you look there, see the little trauma? So there are some examples of trauma where this is a child, and you can see that the bone didn't go back, so obviously he died from that. In this other cave, Actun Tunichil cave, 20 individuals are found there. Several of them are juvenile. So again, right, recurring. In this cave we call Midnight Terror Cave, we found, over 100 skeletons. Whoa. And most of them children. And I should tell you why we called it Midnight Terror Cave. Before I came to teach at NAU, I was the director of the Belize Institute of Archaeology for 14 years. And every time there was the police found information about looting, they would call me, contact me, because then I would have to take the guys from the Institute of Archaeology to go check it out. And one day, in fact, one night, I was asleep and the phone rings. And I answered the phone. It's one of the sergeants at the police station. He said, hey, Dr. Awe, sorry to wake you up, but we have an incident, out in the bush. Apparently this guy fell down the sinkhole and smashed his, he's all broken up, and we need to extract him and get him to a hospital. And can you get in touch with some of your cave buddies and go and extract them? So by the time we got there, it was midnight. And we had to rappel down. There were looters who were trying to loot this cave at nighttime. And when we got down there, it was an ugly scene. There were teeth. This guy had smashed his mandible. There were fresh teeth all over. So I know, it was a little ugly.
I like them dead long time. But anyway, this guy was still alive. In fact, he survived. But we had to put a gurney and pull him up and get him out. And this happened around midnight. So we called that cave Midnight Terror. So this is deep down in the cave. You can see one of my students down there. And look, just all kinds of stuff. And the looters, two skulls of children. This one is that one there. I had Raph hold it in his hand for scale. Somebody had moved it and just left it there, not the Maya. But anyway, right, most of those from that cave, look at that. Now every cave that we looked at, most of the times they're in the areas where water flows. Right? So then I thought, all right, I have good evidence from caves. You've been there. So that's the site of Chichen Itza in Yucatan. A very famous site if you ever go there. In fact, this pyramid called the Castillo, or the Temple of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, has 360 steps if you count the stairs on all four sides. But anyway, that's that structure. There is a roadway, ancient Maya road, that goes that way to the sacred well, or sacred cenote. And there's the road, and there's where the well is, there's the well. Well, Spanish priests had reported that the Maya were throwing female virgins. Remember I mentioned that before, right? And so we were lucky that some years ago, first Harvard, folks from Harvard University had gone down, scuba dived in there and found a whole bunch of skeletons. And then more recently, archaeologists from the Mexican government did the same thing. And they found a total of 222 skeletons, of which more than half were juveniles between ages 4 and 10. So again, good evidence that children are being thrown in there. The second largest group were males, so not women. So goodbye with that theory. And in fact, here's the report from this Mexican archaeologist there with the sections that they did. So then I started to look, how early did Mesoamerican people start to practice child sacrifice? And I was blown away because I found out a cave in Puebla known as El Riego dating to between 7,000 and 5,000 BC. They had the remains of 2 children. One had been cremated and the other one, his head had been severed and roasted, cut, and the brains removed. That's way back. Around 1000 BC, this spring in Veracruz, villagers, it was a time of drought, and so the spring wasn't really flowing very well, and so some villagers decided to dig it out so that the water would start to pop out a bit better than it was, and they found a whole bunch of offerings. The offerings included some wooden busts and some cells or adzes, just like the ones I found in the cave for doing agriculture, and also the remains of several children. It was children being placed or offered in locations where there's water, right? So again, that tie to maybe rain gods. I excavated that ball court at the site of Calpech, and we found 2 children in there, right? Again, what were 2 children doing underneath the floor of a ball court? Human sacrifice. A colleague of mine had excavated this site called Kolha in northern Belize and found 30 skulls in this pit. 10 children, 10 female, 10 male, right? All decapitated. So again, I had to pull out all this to convince my colleagues there's evidence for human sacrifice, right? I'm not making this stuff up. So then I started to look at Maya art. And there you can see, right, this like baby human jaguar. And he's on an altar. But look at this guy. This guy's the rain god. And rain gods are easy to identify in Maya art. Just like, what is the rain god for Nordic people? We call him Thor. And what does Thor have in his hand?
that big hammer, or like an axe, right? Well, with the Maya rain god, the Maya believed that flint is the firestone, and it's like lightning, right? Because when you're knapping flint, it sparks. And so it's associated with lightning, with rainfall, right? With storms. So the rain god always showed with a tomahawk, with the axe, the stone blade, and the wooden handle. And he's about to sacrifice that little baby jaguar, or human jaguar. We know who that guy is. He's one of the twin sons of the maize god. Because the twin sons of the maize god, one of them is Junior, named after his father, the maize god, Hunapu. His twin brother is Shbanke, jaguar. So, jaguar, he's got a jaguar tail and jaguar feet. Look at this other example here, right? Look at the death god, skeletal. Look at the rain god, there's a tomahawk in his hand, and they're going to sacrifice this child. Right here again, look at that, the rain god, he even has like lightning coming out of his mouth. He's holding the tomahawk. There's the blade. And look at the child, the little jaguar child right there. So those are mythological examples. But now look at this one. Here's the vase, and if you open up the vase, here you can see what's painted on that. And look, there's a child, and look at the stomach. This is a close-up of that. Look at that. Somebody has cut him just below the sternum to pull out the heart extraction. Now, this is the Maya. Right? The Maya are painting these images for us. Look at this one here. Child on top of an altar. Here, this is the big pot, but then I just zoomed into this, so this is a magnification of this section. Look at the little kid inside a big dish, and look at the V right there below the sternum. He's been slit, no question about that. Another example here, child. Right, this is the vase, close up, you see the child being offered in that dish. Another example here on an altar. See the child. Here you can see the cut. There again, look at the cut. Two different, polychrome vases of the Maya area. So no question about it that this is what's happening. Look at some other examples from outside the Maya world. This one is in Oaxaca with the Mixtec. That's a drawing of this. See the child there is got, it looks like it's a rope. I don't know whether they're going to either use it as a noose or strangulate what's going on. Here again, right? In this case, the guy with the sacrificial knife, right there. I mean, it doesn't get more obvious than that. In this one, big pot with human remains, probably of a child inside. So, there's also, like I said, reports from the Spanish who made first contact with Mesoamerican people. And this is, Hernan Cortes wrote 5 letters to the King of Spain to explain and describe the things that he was noticing and experiencing. And in one of his letters to the King of Spain, he wrote, they have this terrible or horrible and abominable custom. And that is that whenever they want to ask anything from their idols or make a petition, they take boys or girls and even grown men and women, and in front of their idols, they open their breasts and they take their hearts and their entrails out. So they sacrifice them. These 2 Spanish priests also wrote reports about some of these issues. In fact, Sahagún writes this here, that during times of drought, they would start killing the children to the rain god until the rains came, right? So they slew them, right? So that until the rains began in abundance in all the feasts, they sacrificed the children. And these accounts were written in the late 1500s and early 1600s, so a few centuries ago. Again, right here, right, for Yucatan, there are constant references to the sacrifices of boys to these idols. Again, these are all accounts, right, that this is a translation by this guy Tazer from the Peabody Museum at Harvard. And so I just extracted some of the information from that, right? But again, right, they would take people in a solemn procession and sacrifice them at the well at Chichen Itza. That's the one that we just showed you a little while ago. So lots of evidence. Again, right here, right, same thing, I can just skip there. Eric Thompson, who comes in the 1930s, also said that children were brought in procession to be sacrificed at a spring called Mother of Water inside caves. And again, right, sacrificial, but this one is really sort of disturbing in some ways, right? But so we know that the priests started to forbid the Maya to sacrifice kids and people, to stop cutting them open and pulling out their heart or throwing them inside these caves. So what did the Maya do? They decided to sacrifice some children. And why did they do this? Because, again, according to the accounts, well, they thought, hey, what did you guys do to your Christ? You crucified him. So maybe you don't like our method of offering people, so we're just going to use yours, and maybe the priest will be okay with that. And so there were several children that were sacrificed. This is after European contact, right? So again, here again, right? By crucifixion in 1562 by this guy. So, the evidence is there. So just more examples, right, of crucifixion. In fact, look, in 1888, this guy provides the last reported case of crucifixion that takes place in the Maya world. So, I think that the evidence is overwhelming that this was a practice, by the ancient Maya. And the other question that I sort of, asked was, why children? Right? And obviously, whenever we think of children, we think of their purity. And we know that the Maya, when you do offerings, they want people to use things that were zo'oi, pure, uncontaminated. And what I found is that many of the children that were sacrificed, they often liked them, to get the kids who were still breastfeeding, because they were still not eating solid food, so they were more pure. Right? Or because children might be closer to the divine, to the sacred. This guy who worked in Mexico said that, again, they chose children who would not consume solid food. Another individual here said that the flowing and falling of the children's tears ensured rain, and that children look like little rain dots, little clouds. And what's interesting, in one of the caves, look at all the little miniature manos and metates that you use to grind corn. So miniatures are something too we see associated with caves. Children are miniatures. Remember the corn cob that I showed you? It's before it's reached maturity. So we see a lot of that kind of connection going on. Those are incense burners in the caves. And this guy said that children were considered sprouts. And this is even today that children are referred to as sprouts. So it's like the baby corn. And that's why even today in Highland Guatemala, in some of the more traditional remote villages, people are really concerned when they see strangers and they try to get their children into the house because they don't want their children to be sort of taken. Again, probably because of this tradition of the past where children were sacrificed to the rain gods. Now today, the Maya continue to use caves. It's, of course, illegal to offer humans in sacrifice today. I have some friends that I could sacrifice. But then you can see this is in a modern ritual in caves. This is in the Yucatan. Today they still sacrifice chickens. And we see this, right? And what is really interesting, I remember attending one of these ceremonies. So you have the altar, and you notice these bows of
they cut down a branch on a tree and they put them across like a table like this. And the leaves dry up, and what happens to the leaves? They fall like rain. But what's even more interesting, so the underworld, right, earth and then heaven with the branches. But there are 4 children, one on each corner, dedicated to move from there for the shaman to get there. And these kids have to make the sound of the wall every once in a while. Now, you guys don't know what the wall is. The wall is a little earth frog. And when I was growing up in Belize, and my mom would go, están cantando los wok. The wok are singing. It's because he says it's going to rain. Frogs are very much, sensitive to barometric pressure changes. And we know even up here, right, when you hear the frogs start to croak a lot, it's going to rain, right, or there's a change in barometric pressure. So the children have to make the sound of the wall to summon the rain god. So there again, you see the association of children, right, in some of these rituals that persist today. So, as I said, when I started this cave project, I was looking at, you saw the 6 questions that I had. One of them was just, I wanted to know, who are the skeletons represented on finding in caves? Are they adults, males, females, or children? Thank you, goodbye. I never expected that I was going to go down this road and trying to answer the question, why children? So, thank you.
Well, I was just gonna.
You just got out of the cave.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the audience before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
I can understand the explanation of the children, but if they were older, wouldn't they try to run away?
So, again, you notice that often when we see captives, they're bound. So, very likely that the adults that are being taken in there are bound.
Fight kind of a thing to get
Yeah.
away.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of my students asked me, did the adults, volunteer to be sacrificed? I go, if anyone was asking, I'd say, pick him. Don't pick me. Yeah. But yeah, so we know too that, again, from some of the chronicles written by the Spanish, the Maya would sometimes raid villages, not their own, and take captives. And so those are the people that would eventually be sacrificed. So one of the things that I would like to do, we haven't done it yet, but we might do soon, is to do DNA to see if any of the skeletal populations are related to each other. And then that would help to answer that question some more.
I just wanted to say this is not a question, but when I was in southern part of Mexico, we went to a cathedral or two, and the people were coming in and sacrificing chickens in the cathedral.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, it still continues even today.
Most of these caves seem easily accessible. Why do you suppose they aren't more extensively looted?
Sadly, a lot of them are looted. But fortunately, the looters, in terms of the skeletal materials, they're not interested in that. In fact, like the Midnight Terror Cave. And sometimes what we find is that those caves that have deep water, usually people are a little more skittish about that. It's almost like all the primordial fears that we have, right? Darkness, water, underground. The other caves that are easier without deep water, those tend to be looted. And then sometimes, the ones that are more remote. So we were going way up river and finding remote caves that were untouched. But we also worked in some that were looted. Yes.
One more.
This is going to sound a little harsh, but they did this for thousands of years, right? It started from 7,000 BC on. So it must have worked. Killing the children brought the right. I mean, eventually they would say no if it didn't.
Yeah. So good point. You know, I think that one of the things that we did in the caves is to look at evidence for climatic change or climate change. And we noticed that they started to intensify the rituals around that 750 to 850 AD. And that's one of the periods of extreme drought. And so it looks like in the past, when they sacrificed one individual, that was fine, and the rains would come, and you know, the balance in the universe would be maintained. So, you know, the rains came when they should come. Well, when this huge drought period happened, what we see is that the rains aren't coming. So they up the ante. So now there's most of those, right, that we found date to that time period. So it's like, we gotta, maybe the gods aren't responding, let's sacrifice some more people. You know, we refer to those as rituals of intensification. When I talked about climate change, I used the Dust Bowl, you know, that everyone in America, we learn about it in schools, in history. We know that, right, initially the way people responded, because that was a 10-year long drought, you know, is that they were like, all right, they hired this guy to shoot explosives into clouds because they thought that was going to make it rain. It didn't rain. And so they started to, they started to put big billboards and writing different towns, please pray for rain. Eventually, that didn't happen. So then they said, maybe we should try some Native American rituals. And Native Americans would kill snakes and hang them off the fence lines. And so they went out and killed hundreds of snakes, hanged them off the fence lines. And the reason is that snakes look like lightning. And it still didn't rain. And so then eventually what did people do? Pack up and leave. And that's exactly what also happened in the Maya region. So they tried religion, they tried all kinds of stuff, and the rains didn't come. And then eventually you pack up and leave.
Any ritual cannibalism?
We don't see any evidence for that among the Maya. Now, having said that, we know that we do have some evidence among the Aztecs. And you know, one of the things that sometimes people, some people have sort of exaggerated to some degree. It wasn't like this was done because they wanted protein. Often what they would do is warriors, fierce warriors that were captured, they were sacrificed and they would eat some of their flesh because it was assumed that if you consumed the flesh of this very brave and very fierce warrior, that you would also sort of acquire those traits. So we do have that among the Aztecs. Did the Maya practice it? It's possible. We just don't have the kind of evidence that we have among the Aztecs.
Dr. I got a question. Any evidence of Xipe Totec in Maya?
So, for those of you who don't know who Xipe Totec is, again, the Aztecs, one of their gods was the god of springtime, right? When everything would bloom and grow, etc. Because the Aztecs lived like we do in Flagstaff at 7,000 feet above sea level. And this god, Xipe Totec, the god of spring, every year they would sacrifice an individual in honor of Xipe Totec. But that form of sacrifice was very different from others. In that sacrifice, they would flay the person. That was skin them. And then the priests would wear the skin. And again, that's written up by people like Bernardino de Sahagún, one of the Spanish priests. So we don't see that in the Bible. Yeah.
Isn't there a belief that human sacrifice also occurred because of dedication to like a new ruler or archaeological buildings?
So yes, we noticed that sometimes when they went to dedicate a new building, and usually new rulers would want to dedicate a new temple, to whichever important god. And sometimes they would sacrifice, especially warriors. And for instance, in the Templo Mayor in Mexico City, they found on the four corners of that temple, I think there were like 18 skeletons of adult male warriors. Yeah. And 18 is double 9.
One more question. One more.
I'm just going to, I did some excavation at the Eldon Pueblo years ago, and we were excavating a wall. And inside the wall were little human figurines. They weren't people, they were figurines, but we were told at the time that that was probably a dedication. They didn't sacrifice anybody to do it, but they used the representation.
Yeah, no question. In one of the sites that I work on in Belize, we also find figurines, but it's really interesting what they did there. What we find is that none of our figurines are complete. The heads are broken off. And sometimes we find just the little heads cached as offerings, and then the bodies are placed somewhere else. So we do that. And most cultures in the world practice human sacrifice. I mean, in Germany and in England, I don't know if you've ever read about the bog people.
Yes.
And so in the bogs or swamps, they have found skeletons, and the preservation is so amazing that they have still found the rope that they were strangulated with. They have cut them open and they could see what they ate as their last meal. The hair was still preserved, fingernails, everything. So, it was a tradition practiced by cultures all over the world, not just Mesoamerica.
Let's thank Dr. Awe for this excellent presentation.